ML Headhunt is here, and that means you can get any ML5 unit that you want all the way up to SPP. So this is a big deal. It's really important to take a unit that benefits your account a lot in this RTA meta. And so because of that, I've made a tier list for you guys here that explains and talks about why you should pick every unit and what situations they're good in. So I hope you guys enjoy. And if you do, I'm a really small channel, subscribing, liking, commenting, all that really helps me out. So I'll see you guys around. So first off, we're going to start we have the breakdown of the tier list. So first off, we've got high priority top tier units. These are units that are seen everywhere in RTA, and they're just like the best options. If you don't have one of these, I'm going to highly suggest you take one of them, unless there's like your playstyle is very situationally dependent on someone else. We've got this second tier is like decent picks in RTA. So these are units that are kind of used a lot of places, not only as counter picks, but also as like standalone picks in their own way. Beyond that, we have situational and good at their job. So these are units that you're only going to pick in certain situations or certain draft styles, but they do their job fairly well, and they do what they're supposed to do fairly well. Beyond that, we have situational with counterplay options. So these are, I don't want to say bad at their job per se, but there's just a lot of ways to play around these units, and because of that, they're just not as good as the situational but good picks. We have a do not pick list. This is a list of units that you shouldn't pick. We'll explain why. Don't worry, everything will be explained. Then we have the Cleave units. These are units that, although they may work in a different playstyle, they're primarily Cleave units, and you should only really be picking them if you're going to be cleaving. And then the units that are not included include Harsetti, Ilanov, Lumuna, Senya, and obviously Ainz. So the event goes all the way up to SPP, so she's the newest ML5 that you can pick. So starting off with the high priority top tier units, we have DDR. So this guy you should have picked with your ML Blessing 2. If for some reason you did not pick him, you are going to pick him from this event. He is the only option. He is everywhere. Everyone's first picking him, early picking him, taking him with BBK. He counters this HP scaling, Elianov, meta, everything like that. He just counters every playstyle, and he provides your entire team with damage because of his Pestilence buff. So he is an amazing unit. You need to take him. Similarly, you have a Tywin. So a Tywin brings Death Break. He brings stuns, dealing with Genoa. He also brings a cleanse. He cleanses Noctwell's bind buff, right? So he's a really good unit. You can run him as a DPS or as a mitigation knight. So he has a lot of build diversity there too. You don't know what a Tywins you're going to be facing when you play them, right? He's just a fantastic anchor in the current meta that deals with debuffs well, and he also works really well with SPP, who we'll talk about now. So SPP, she brings Strip, she brings Pushback, she brings Enrage buff. Enrage buff benefits units like Genoa, like a Tywin, like Teiyu, and it allows these units to shine because a Tywin ignores ER, right, when he has his Enrage buff. So Sea Phantom being able to provide that, which also gives a nice damage boost to some units that are fast DPS, like Satan or Gala. So Sea Phantom is the queen of aggro right now. Everyone's taken her. She's a great unit. I third pick her a lot, and she's also very commonly used early with a Tywin. Next up, we have Zeo. So Zeo is really important to take, not only if you're planning on cleaving, but as an anti-cleave option. So because Zeo guarantees you to take that first turn with his S2 passive, even against Harsetti. So he's really good into Harsetti, he's really good into like Briar Witch Cleave, really good into your standard like Ran Cleave. A lot of cleavers will take him early if they don't pre-ban him. So if you're looking to get into Cleave, he's also a decent unit to have on your roster. And just being able to disrupt anyone who's trying to take that first turn from you, even if you draft slower, is really important. So he's a great unit to have. Next, we've got Blood Moon Haste. So he's one of the primo anchors right now. Him and DBS, really solid, both countered by DDR again. So if you don't have DDR, don't be taking Blood Moon Haste. But he provides a huge barrier and immunity to your whole team upon the death of an ally. He also heals a ton with his S1. If you have Celestine and on a counter set, he can strip, do a bonus attack, and almost full heal your team sometimes. It's really nice. And he is a nuker on his S3. Once one of your allies have died, he goes in and he just one-shots something, penetrating their defense. Obviously weak to Elenov, but, he still does his job really well as an anchor. He's a great unit to have, a great unit to take early, even take late as a backup plan, but he's really solid. Next up, we have Navy Captain Landy. So she's falling off a little bit in the PvP meta. Obviously, you've got units who just coming out like Flan, who have that guaranteed crit. You've got Gala, who's got guaranteed crit. So she is not without her counters. She's definitely a leader pick in the meta right now. And this is an RTA focused tier list. However, it's worth noting that Candy is insane everywhere. She's used in so many expos, she's used in so many PvE content, she's used in Abyss, she is used everywhere in this game. So if you don't have her, she's a really good option. I'd say almost second to DDR, but given the sake of we're trying to focus on RTA for this tier list, I put him here at the bottom of the high priority tier. But she is so good everywhere, right? Like DDR, you can't use anywhere else, but Candy you can use everywhere. So especially if you're not going to do RTA at all, which I completely against, you should try it. It's really not that bad, and it's really, really fun. But if you're not going to do RTA at all, Candy is definitely the pick. And then Conk would be your second pick if you're not ever going to do RTA. Okay, so that covers the high priority tier. So those are the units that, like, if you have them available, you should take them. Now, between the different ones, I'm trying to rank these in order. So, you know, left to right. Left is the higher priority, right is the lowest priority per tier. But it's worth taking one of these guys, I think, if you don't have one of them, or all of them. Okay, next up, we have decent picks in RTA. So Bellion is up here. So the reason Bellion is not like a top tier unit is there are a lot of cleavers pre-ban her, because what she does is she prevents anyone from using, or your opponent from using souls on the field. She also brings in AoE provoke, and people build her a lot on, like, you can build her on counter Elbrus, you can build her really fast so she gets that provoke off, you can build her on injury set so she deals with these HP damage scalers. There's a lot of build diversity for her, which is really nice. Means you don't really know what kind of Beeline. You can also build her on like 3F, super bulky. You don't really know what Beeline you're going to face, right? She's really good in that sense, but because she's pre-banned a lot, you may not get to pick her that often. And not only that, but there are units like Frida that provide the souls for the team anyways. And so units like that mean that people who are like cleaving with Briar Witch they can just let your Belian through, because they're gonna use Frida or someone to provide the souls for Briar. We have a little bit of an upgrade here. We've got Dragon King Sharoon in the decent picks tier. I was actually told by some people to put her in the high priority tier, but you know, I met them in the middle and she's in decent picks. The main reasoning for this is she brings a lot of utility to the table. So she does the 2-turn buff reduction on her S3, so that's basically a strip for anything that's not 3-turn or more, right? So it's basically a full AoE strip on the opposing team. She brings Death Break onto your tanky units, so Death Break is insanely good right now. It's the best debuff in the game, right? And so she brings Death Break, and not only that, she counters these two guys. So she's situational in the fact that she counters Atai and DDR, but she's really good in the fact that she still brings this full strip. She also stuns, you know, into Genoa and stuff. And if you're taking her, then the opponent can't take her, right? So that stuns are not going to be able to be countered as easily. And then she's just really solid unit. Next up, we have Mediator Cowrick. So Cowrick, it's important to note that if you don't have any options into Harsetti, and you plan on letting Harsetti through, he's a really good option to her. With Warhorn especially, he can cut, taking care of some of that speed RNG that you've got later on and the second or third turns after Harsetti goes. He brings immunity and attack buff. Those are great buffs. And then he also does decent damage if you build him like a little bruiser. So he's a really solid unit. The only issue with him is that he doesn't really do much else besides his cleanse and stuff. And so Laya is his biggest competitor for taking up that draft position, and Laya can one-shot units, right? And so if you have Laya, it may not be worth it to take Cowrick, but if you lack any cleansers other than like maybe Infinite Horizon Acades, he is a really solid option still. So he's definitely good, but there are other units that do his job, like Laya, namely, that if you have, you may just ignore him. Next up, we have Sylvan Sage Vivian. So Sylvan Sage is a really solid unit that can, if your opponent lacks the ability to get through her focus and get through her damage reduction, she can just like sweep entire teams, 1v4, right? The biggest issue is she deals, there's units like SPP around, but SPP is a very common pre-ban, and so, and so while SPP is a very common pre-ban, that means that you can take Sylvan Sage almost freely in that situation. So she does really well into like she can 1v4, and then if you're bringing her late, like picking her 3, 4, 5 into a team that doesn't have the damage to get through to her, or doesn't have any like extra damage such as Miki to deal with her, she's just a really solid unit in those situations. And she's just a really solid DPS in general. Next up, we have Specimen Says. He's getting his new EE, and not only that, but his new EE combined with all the dual attackers in the meta, a lot of the death breaks. If he gets to pull his S3 on a unit and kill them, even if it's through death break, doesn't even need to be a stun, but stuns are getting more and more rampant, right? Especially with the new flan and stuff. But even if you're not killing someone with the stun, you're hitting them with the death break. If you get a kill off with that S3, usually if you're running him with a Wind Rider or something, he can snowball and he can just be a really solid DPS. Plus, he comes with some evasion to help you mitigate any damage coming in. So he's a really solid DPS in general. Next up, we have LRK. So for all of the buffed units, we're kind of anticipating how their buffs are going to perform in the meta and judging them based on that. So LRK, we're under the impression he has that skill reset for the team buff. So he's really good into Knockwool, right? He provides a fat barrier when Knockwool AoE S3s, and then he also resets the skill cooldowns. Also solid in Direct from Roana too, right? So he's a really nice unit. And not only that, but he's an anchor. He provides mitigation. So any mitigation knight gets bonus points for being able to provide that level of mitigation. And he can also do a lot of damage too, right? Especially if you put him on like 3F or something. The only thing is he needs like a lot of HP to pull off like that. So he needs some pretty solid gear. And he's, weak to DDR. He's weak to this injury meta. So he's not without his counters, but he's a really, really good anchor. And I think he's going to be even better now with the Knockwool. Anti-Knockwool, anti-Roana with the skill reset. Next, we have Pirate Captain Flan. So I didn't want to put her in situational because I think she's a little more than that. But she's not seen super commonly. But she's still really solid. Being able to strip, being able to stun. If you take her later in a draft and your opponent lacks like ways to consistently cleanse or lacks a unit like A-Tai, she's going to be able to just like keep the opposing team on lockdown and continue to cycle and push everyone up. So she's really, really devious if you get her let through late. So really solid unit. I'm going to go a little faster through the rest of these. Conqueror Lilius. So Conqueror Lilius is great for PvE. But in RTA, she's really fallen off this season. She went from like rank 30th last season to like rank 70th this season. So she's really falling off. They're just, you've got units like Celine, who are just going to nuke someone. You've got units, obviously, Zio deals with her well. And then you just have a lot of units that people are building faster now, right? And so she kind of falls off in that scenario. But if you're playing really slow, like you're trying to take, Cotton Candy drafting is still relatively viable. Not really, but relatively. And so if you're drafting slow, getting that AoE Vigor buff is still really nice. And she can be an opener for a lot of these slower players. So if you want to take her and you draft like exclusively slow, like she's not that bad of an option. Next, we have Lionheart Sirmia. So now she's no longer weak to SPP, thank God, but she still runs into the issue that high mitigation teams kind of just mitigate her damage. But if you're able to take her in a situation where the opponent doesn't have mitigation or like crazy anti-crit that you're worried about, then she's really good and she can just nuke entire team comps for you. Really solid unit. Sage Ball is one of the better disruptors right now. So you've got a lot of units like SPP or like Muna and stuff like that are going to be taking that first turn. And what Sage Ball can do is he can then cut up from that first turn because he cuts based on his S3 cooldown, similarly to like Infinite Horizon Acades, right? And so he'll cut up and then he can either AoE sleep the opposing team or he can just sleep one or two units. And so that allows him to basically take that follow-up turn away from your opponent and disrupt them completely. So really solid unit there. Obviously, he's not as good as he was back in the golden days, but he's really close, right? Okay, next we have Abyssal Yufine. So Abyssal Yufine is no longer as good as she used to be. Obviously, SPP deals with her a lot. And then you've got Elvira in a niche case. But not only that, there's Genua, who Genua just kind of like rips her apart. There are other units that just can take her down really quickly or penetrate defense. Those units are really gonna have no problem killing Aeuthine. And so basically Aeuthine's a ticking time bomb. And if she goes off, it's almost a guaranteed win every time. But if she doesn't go off, then she kind of doesn't do much for your team. Obviously the Elber's attack down buff is fine, but she's an okay anchor in a situation where you have seen opponent picking a lot of damage, and like that they can't kill the Aeuthine, but she has her opportunity to counter a lot and then fill up her S3 and then go. Next we have Dilibet. So again, another unit prematurely ranked based on the buffs that are coming up. So Dilibet is a really solid option. Even with SPP reducing her fighting spirit, she tends to hit her proc on S2 after only a few turns. And what she does is she full cleanses your whole team, and she skill resets the opposing team. And with her buffs, it's just gonna make her a little more viable doing that job. And I think she will start to see a little more of a resurgence then. So really solid unit. Next is Lone Crescent Bellona. She's another one of those hard steady counters. Punishes a lot of those heavy AoE teams. The only issue is she is a dark unit, so she's just weak to Satan. She's weak to LQC. She can just get one shot. Even though people build her really bulky nowadays, right? Because you don't need CC on her. She just is susceptible to getting one shot. But into those team comps, like these hard steady comps and stuff that are bringing a lot of AoE, she's a really solid unit still. Next is Remnant Violet. Never evades. If you don't like your luck, if you're an unlucky person, don't even think about taking him. But he is really solid. He's a nice one-shotter. He can do a lot of damage on the field if he evades. And with his buff that changed his evasion from being an evasion buff to being just like his S2 passive, he's a lot more consistent. At least he's not strippable, and so he's a really solid unit for sure. Just a nice DPS, but obviously not without him a few counter picks and like evasion units like DDR and Shalltear and stuff. Next is Urban Shadow Shu. So Shu is a nice injury unit. She's not as good as VDR, but she's still a good injury unit, and being a good injury unit in this meta is really nice. And being able to build her super fast because of her low crit rate requirement is also really nice. The one nice thing too, to follow up, more nice things, is that she's not really one-shottable as much as units like LCV, because a lot of time you'll build her fast and on Proof of Valor with a lot of HP, and build her on like an HP neck or a CC neck instead of a crit damage one. And so she at least gets a little more bulk from that, but she still is susceptible to your LQCs and stuff. And she's an HP damage dealer, but she also scales her damage off of HP, so she's weak to injury as well as being the main proponent of it. Next, we've got Faithless Litica. So Litica is mostly Cleave. However, she also has her place in the skill reset department, which is primarily to deal with units like a Miki or Laya, who are still everywhere. So being able to deal with those units is nice. And also, if you're taking a Miki, you're taking Laya, a lot of times those people aren't going to be playing fast. So Litica being a little slower, but being able to have enough effectiveness to deal with those units is totally fine, because you're planning on taking that first turn anyways. So pretty solid unit right now. So now next up we have the situational units with a lot of counterplay options. So first up is RB. So RB is really nice. He can really threaten a Cleave setup. The only issue with this is that he's really hard countered by units like Bryceria, and Bryceria is everywhere right now. So he's, you find that most of the time I'm getting cleaved, it's from a Bryceria cleaver, and I can't even pick RB into that anyway, so issue with that. Also TML cleave, he's really weak too, because she just provides extinction. Next up we have SEC, so she's solid. She gets to S3, and if you don't have answers into her, which the primary answer is bonus damage, right? Then she can basically, just like SSV, kind of one-shot your whole team. The only issue is her condition for doing that is she needs to be hit by critting DPS, whereas like SSV can be hit by anyone, and because she needs to be hit by critting DPS, there's a lot of units that just don't crit right now, and so they can just kind of whittle her down without even critting, and then she doesn't counterattack, and then you kind of just take the L. Same goes for Martial Artist Ken. So Martial Artist Ken is just super weak to the units that don't crit, which are everywhere. But in a situation where you have a lot of mitigation, he provides himself with vigor buff, so he can be pretty tanky. And if you build him really tanky and you've got mitigation, he can survive and he can dish out a lot of damage. But again, he's only able to be picked in those lots of critting comps like SEC is. Strays, my poor guy Strays has fallen off so hard. There's just anti-crit everywhere. There's units with maximum damage limit everywhere. There's units with evasion everywhere. And so because of that, Strays just fails to kill a lot of the time. Not only that, but he requires you to have Benamaru's Tachi if you really want to use him in this meta, and then also really good gear to build him really fast. So because of those options, he's just not that great right now, and I just don't see him picked against me or for me at all. Twisted Eidolon Kayron, so he could be moved up a little bit. We'll have to see. But the biggest issue with Twisted Eidolon Kayron is, he requires insane gear. So you need him to be able to build super high ER, you need him to build damage, bulk, all of that stuff. Now, the good news is with his buff, he's going to be a lot more consistent. He's going to hit the damage thresholds way earlier. And so because of that, he might not need to be built as tanky, which could make him a really solid unit. So we'll kind of have to see how this one plays out. But he's not without his options. Obviously, he's a unit that counterattacks a lot. So units like Biblis or Rowana are kind of just screw with him. So, he's not without his issues, but I do think he's on the up and up. Next, we have Solitaria. So Solitaria is just completely oppressive to some of those fighting focus units. Yeah, focus. So that's going to be Sylvan Sage. The new Flan is a big unit that she hard counters. Any units that require focus to make their kit work, Rylet, those units are just completely hard countered by Solitaria. Because unlike Sea Phantom, who has those gains, she just completely nullifies them, says you don't get anything. The only issue is beyond that, she brings a lot of bonus attacks, which are heavily punished by a lot of units like Lionheart, like Biblis, like Rowana. And then she also, her S3 stun is nice, but it's a single target, and it's punished, by units like DKS and everything. So she's definitely, maybe a contender for moving up a little bit, but she's not without her options, and I don't think she does enough on the board because, she counters those focus units so hard that she doesn't do too much else with her kit that your opponent can kind of just, shift the draft away from those focus units, and then she kind of left in the water. We've got Apocalypse Ravi. Unfortunately, to my dismay, she just isn't what she used to be. She doesn't have any sort of cleanse built in, and so because of that, she can be built really bulky, but she needs really good gear. And then in that situation, she has the ability to completely win a game for you, absolutely. And she brings injury. If you got her on counter pen, she brings nice injury, which can be really good. But the problem is there are just so many ways to control her right now, and unlike her sister Ravi, she doesn't have that built-in cleanse, right? Ravi cleanses on a crit, and so Apoc doesn't have anything like that, and because of that, she's really struggling in this meta. Next, we have Ruel of Light. I'm a little worried. The biggest issue with Ruel of Light is so she self-revives with her new buff, which is great, and she provides damage limit for her allies. Again, also great. Biggest issue, right? Bryceria. Bryceria is everywhere. Cleavers are using Bryceria everywhere, so Ruel just doesn't do anything in those situations. So because of that, I think she's still going to struggle. Next, we have Maid Chloe. She's nice in these really high ER drafts, or these BBK Miki drafts, but again, she's now without her counters. She's bringing a non-attack skill. She can just get her buff stripped, and after she pulls that S3, she's not doing much for your team. So she's just not as good as a lot of these other options. Next up, we have the Do Not Pick group. Some of this is, you guys may disagree with, but this is just based on how the meta is right now. The big one is Spectre. So most people pick Spectre with your first ML Blessing. The big issue, if you haven't picked her, she's mostly used and recommended for that because of her PvE ability, right? She's really good in Abyss and stuff with her poisons. Excuse me. But the biggest issue is in a situation unlike PvE, right? PvP and RTA, she just struggles. There's so many splash damage options. There's so many good AoE damage dealers that she's only a really, really situational 4 or 5 pick. And even then, sometimes even if I don't have the single targets, but I know I have the momentum, I just let the Spectre through and she doesn't even get to do anything because I've got that AoE control. So Spectre definitely struggles in the current meta. She used to be really good, but there's just so many ways to deal with her now that just even a Miki. A Miki can almost kill a Spectre with that AoE on the S3, and a Miki's not even designed to deal with Spectre. It just is a byproduct. She does good with Spectre. So yeah, Spectre struggles. LQC, same issue. Either you build her slow and she requires just so much support to get working, or you build her fast on Benimar's Tachi, and then she has the same issues as Strays, that there just is a lot of ways to provide a lot of mitigation or ways to provide anti-crit that she just struggles into. And she kind of just one-shots one unit and then loses all of her momentum. So unless one-shotting that one unit is your entire win con for the match, which it usually isn't because hyper carry meta is kind of dead, it just won't work. Not only that, but you have units like DBS and stuff. So if your opponent has that dark unit you're trying to one-shot, they just throw it in the back with DBS in the front, and then you're screwed, right? So yeah, really struggles. DJB, he's fine. He's a cleanser. He provides immunity. You can put him on a Turnus to cut, but that's kind of it. The barrier inversion was cool when FCC was everywhere, but right now it's just not as useful. So he just does not see a lot of play, and so it's not worth taking him. Plus, he's kind of ugly. Closer Charles, we've got this guy. He's a Cleave focused unit, but I think he's one of the worst. Obviously his conditional cut on the opponent getting low HP is nice, but he's a Cleave unit. If you're Cleave and you know you're missing him, you know you're going to get him anyways. So I'm just recommending everyone else just avoid Charles. Same goes with Leica. If you're Cleave and you know that Leica's that last missing piece of your Cleave team, you can go for her. But she's just not the best way to deal with those evasion units, and she's not the best way to deal with high HP units either. Units like DDR and building high momentum with SVP, those are going to be your true answers into that. So she's just not as good as she used to be, and really high gear requirement. FCC just doesn't do anything nowadays. The barrier's cool, but like so many people provide better mitigation anyways, and the skill null on S3 is just ruined by unbuffable and stuff, so she's just bad. Dark Corvus, he's great in Guild War, and I see people pick him in RTA, but they pick him in RTA, you just bring some injury and he's dead. So he's just not great. I think when people are picking him in RTA, they're kind of trolling or they expect to lose, so he's just not great. Operator Sigret, she does no damage, she struggles into anti-crit, her ignore ER, like her kit is like wonky. I think that her S2 and S3 need like some different parameters switched, so she's just not that great, and she needs a limited artifact to work wall border, so just don't take her. Archdemon Shadow, she's got the seal, she's got counterattacks. Unfortunately, that means she's punished way too heavily by units like Lionheart, like Biblis, like Rowana, and not only that, but her seal sometimes just doesn't even land, and her S3 is not very synergistic with her kit either, so she's just not a great unit right now. Next up, we have the Cleave tier, and I want to preface with the Cleave tier. Some of these units can be picked for not Cleave, right? So let's say you're not a dedicated Cleaver, but maybe a Requiem on a Zeo pick for you is a way to win a match on a 4-5. So like that's fine. But if you are Cleave, you probably know the game well enough to know which of these units you kind of need to fill out your roster. And so just take that unit. But to quickly summarize, Briar Witch is takeable by people who aren't Cleave, but she's pretty much only used in Cleave nowadays. Build her fast, she's your main bridge. Or she's your main Deathbreaker, Stripper, everything like that. She's got Soul Burning nor ER, really solid unit. Anti-evasion, really solid. Top model Lulika requires building a whole team around her. She's not entirely fast on her own, so she needs speed imprints, but she is a primary cleaver. Requiem can be used. She takes that follow-up turn guaranteed if your front row unit takes that first turn. So she's really nice. Got the skill reset, but not without her counters like LRK. Judge Kisei is a fine. She can just completely nuke your team, but she requires, again, building a whole team around her. Ludwig, same kind of deal. Really weak into units that suppress souls. The Lion. But he still has his place. Does a ton of damage if you get him to work. Astromancer Elena, problem is she's getting outclassed by Mort. So for most people who need to deal with counterattacks and prevent counterattacks, Astromancer Elena just is not as good as Mort for them. But for Cleavers, she's still a viable option. She's a bridge, so if you need her, you need her. SBA is going to get some jumps. She might even work with Parsetti drafts, but she's going to be able to cut on those follow-up turns by anyone taking a turn, I believe, or it might be any of your allies. And so because of that, she's got that cut, but she has no strip. And so any immunity units or units that bring immunity like Handguy or like Bloodman Haste and stuff, those units are just going to get screwed. But hopefully she does more damage and stuff with her burns now with her buff. Commander Pavel just struggles into anti-crit, struggles into people like SPP, and while he's a great bridge and he's even better now with Plan, he's still just a Cleave. So again, if you need him, you need him, but you know who you are. And then the bottom tier we talked about already, but yeah. Those units you get picked. So I hope that was good. I tried to keep it brief. If you guys have any questions, you should join our Discord down below, and then in the description. And then you can also go ahead and comment any questions you have. I'm a small channel, so yeah, always helping by subscribing, liking if this was useful to you. I hope it was. It's a big deal, getting these get an ML5 on your account for free. So it's important to pick a good one. But pick who you love at the end of the day. It's your account, right? It's important to, be good in the meta, but it's also important to have fun, right? So take who you want at the end of the day. It's my biggest advice, but I hope this was useful, and I will see you guys in the next video.